Hey guys, welcome to the Dr. Catavet podcast. Today we're going to be talking about vaccinations and puppy vaccine as well as dog vaccines. Welcome to the channel if you're new. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. This video is primarily for the Dr. Catavet, the Dog Doctor podcast. But if you're looking on YouTube, stay tuned, it's going to be interesting. People usually ask me, hey doc, should I really vaccinate my puppies? Or why should I vaccinate my puppy? Or even, should I vaccinate my dog? And every time they do, it's always an interesting discussion. So first of all, we're going to talk about puppy vaccines. Then we're going to talk about adult dog vaccine. Vaccines on a whole. Now, what are vaccines? Vaccines are usually a disease or a virus or a portion of a virus or something that makes the immune system. The purpose of a vaccine is usually to stimulate an immune response. So you're going to introduce something into the animal. It's going to get the immune system, is going to see it, hopefully to recognize it. Then you're going to most likely do a booster of that vaccine. And whenever the animal is exposed to a booster of the vaccine or the virus itself or a bacteria, the immune system is going to know what it is and stem an adequate response. So the main purpose of vaccination is for disease prevention or infection prevention. For say, some vaccines may actually eliminate any chance of an animal catching a specific disease or virus, whereas another vaccine may just limit the effect that disease or virus may have on it. I use that as an example. However, sometimes there are bacteria that we vaccinate against, like the leptospirosis vaccine, for instance, is vaccinating against a bacteria. Leptospirosis, also known as a spirochete, whereas parvovirus or rabies virus would be, of course, vaccinating against a virus. Now, there are many different types of vaccines. The most common ones would be modified live virus or killed virus. Some would actually be attenuated vaccine where a viral protein or something may be added to another chemical so that the body would recognize that protein and the wall of a virus. The more common ones would be what you call a killed virus or a modified live virus, whereby they take away the virulence factor. So the virus is there, but it cannot manifest to its full effect. So the animal would not get that disease, but the virus is in its body. It's going to stem the immune system to recognize this virus and build an immune response. And when you see it again, or when the animal is exposed to that virus again, the immune system would counter it, avoiding it from becoming an infection. But basically, that's the reason why we do primary vaccines plus booster vaccines. So primary vaccine, different vaccine may have different protocol. Like the parvovirus, for instance, you may have to do 3 sets of vaccine 3 weeks in a row, or 4 sets of vaccine 4 weeks in a row based on geographic location. Similar with the leptospirosis vaccines, whereas rabies might recommend you do one now, then you do another one a year later, then you wait 3 years to do another one. So different viruses and different vaccines would have a different protocol. But the idea is to stimulate the immune system to recognize and remember a specific virus or a viral protein or a bacteria. So if it's ever exposed to it in the future, it can stem an adequate response. That hopefully should sort of the what is. Let's go straight into when should you vaccine. Ideally, for puppy vaccines, if you start a puppy off in the right way, it gets easy after that. Most puppy vaccine recommend that you start 6 to 8 weeks. Some brand may recommend 8 weeks. I'll tell you why later on. Some brand may say from 6 weeks. If it's a puppy that grew up with its mother, so like got the maternal antibodies from the colostrum and the milk was weaned at 5 to 6 weeks. Anywhere within the 6 to 8 week for the first dose of vaccination will be adequate. Thereafter, some people may booster every 3 weeks, some prefer to booster every 4 weeks. It varies based on the owner, the breeder, and certain things. I would do 3 to 4 week intervals and do 1 to 2 boosters per puppy. The booster is basically administering the same vaccine again a few weeks later. I'll explain that a little bit later again as to when do you vaccine. As for after that, thereafter, when you finish the first vaccination protocol for like puppy vaccine, and it's fully vaccinated, which would be got a series, 2 series of or 3 series of vaccinations. After that, you would vaccinate once per year, and not only does that give you an opportunity to examine the animal and see where it's at, but it gives the immune system a little refresher. It's like That would ensure the immune system is ready for any possible exposure. Now, let's talk about core vaccines. So, a lot of people, if you don't know, your core vaccines. Core vaccines would be a series of vaccination that basically, no matter where you are, it would be mandatory that you vaccinate against these things. Now, just to let you know, like parvovirus, for instance, is probably in every core vaccine around the world because every year parvovirus would have killed millions of dogs and it's still killing millions of dogs every year. So core vaccines for puppy vaccine, parvovirus, you would probably have parainfluenza in there, probably have hepatitis or adenovirus, as well as canine distemper. These were viruses that would have killed millions of dogs, and the vaccine was developed to protect the general population against these things. It also have what you call regionally specific vaccines. So if you live in a place with brucellosis, for instance, you might have a brucellosis vaccine for dog. They have a leptospirosis in areas where leptospirosis is very prominent. And then you have, for instance, rabies vaccine, which may be considered a core vaccine in certain geographic location where the rabies virus exists. So that's what the core vaccine is, and it would be recommended that if you live in these locations, for instance, in places with Lyme disease and kennel cough, you'd have a Bordetella vaccine in North America. So core vaccine may vary based on where you are, but these would be the core things that you need to vaccinate your dogs against, protect it against any and every possible infection that it may be exposed to in its life. Of course, there'd be other things. There'd be seasonal disease. There'd be other diseases that may be introduced. There's also other infections like tick-borne infections and parasitic infections, but we're not getting into that. Today we're talking about vaccinations and the things you can vaccinate against. If you remember, I mentioned earlier, you normally vaccinate against viruses. Rabies virus, parvovirus, parainfluenza virus, adenovirus. Normally, you'd vaccinate against viruses. However, you can also vaccinate against some bacteria. Leptospirosis, for instance, which is a nice spiral bacteria in the spirochete family, normally existing in rodents. The most common cause of being exposed to leptospirosis would be from the urine of rodents. So, rat pee. A rat would have passed on your food. Don't know if you know about rats and mice, but they normally leave a trail of urine behind them. If they were to get into your puppy food, for instance, your puppy is not vaccinated against leptospirosis, they left the urine in the food. Most time when you leave food overnight, that can be a big deal. And boom, your puppy eats it, it starts getting sick. It might change color to yellow or green if you've ever been exposed to leptospirosis. You know, by the time the animal becomes green, it's probably too late. The parvovirus again also is a very common virus amongst puppies. It's usually fecal oral transmission, highly infectious, it's a high virulence, and most times it leads to large, they call it high morbidity, high mortality. So easy to get infected if you're not vaccinated, and they usually die when they're infected. Yes, it can be cured, but the cost of curing is way more significant than the cost of vaccination. And most time the animal would pay with its life. Parvovirus normally is a GI virus that would destroy the intestinal lining. So normally start off with vomiting, diarrhea, and your animal is off food. Bloody diarrhea, very stink bloody diarrhea. So normally with a parvo diarrhea, here vets say, it smells like parvo in here because it's something that you can recognize by smell and by the symptoms, but there is tests you do for all of these viruses. So yeah, but parvo is a very common virus amongst puppies. So you vaccinate against parvo primarily. Canine distemper as well would have been similar, but in most places, canine distemper has been pushed out of the population, but it still exists in a lot of places. That's why it's actually in the core vaccines. Um, just to give you a little heads up on the reason why most vaccines are recommended from 6 to 8 weeks. If you get into immunology, you would know there is this thing called maternal antibodies. And if it's a puppy that's suckling on its mother who had good cholesterol, the mother usually takes some of her antibodies and put it in the milk, and the puppy will get that. So as long as the puppy had a good cholesterol flow from the mother, suckling on the mother for the first 6 weeks of life, it would have had maternal antibodies from the mother. So the immune response, if it's exposed to anything within that period, would not necessarily be its own immune response, but the immune response from the antibodies it received from its mother.
Yeah.
But when you get to just around the winner puppy at 5 weeks, which is usually done, and you get to around 6 weeks when it has to build its own immune system. So if you introduce the vaccine, which would be a foreign entity, like lack of a better terminology, you introduce that infection, although it's not a full infection, it would be a similarly identifiable thing to the infection. You introduce it to the body, the immune system is going to recognize it, and then the puppy's immune system is going to now stem a response to this vaccine. So then you do a booster in 3 to 4 weeks. It definitely does not have the maternal antibody in its bloodstream at that point in time. Its own immune system now is going to have to recognize this booster and stem an adequate response. And just for safety, you normally booster it a third time. In modern places with serious parvo infections, I know in some countries right now they're doing a third booster, which is a fourth vaccine and puppy vaccine. So to do the full parvo series would be a series of 4 vaccines 3 to 4 weeks apart. Some countries that's not mainstream as yet. Other places you might have other things. Rabies virus, for instance, you definitely wish that you vaccinated against rabies before you ever exposed to it. Um, Another thing to consider, something like leptospirosis, which means you're vaccinating against a bacteria. There is actually, normally you have what a L2 or an L4 vaccine for leptospirosis, which would be 2 serovars or 4 serovars. If you're not too scientifically savvy, a serovar is basically a different type or like a variety of the same disease. So leptospirosis now can have as much as 250 serovars, but if you vaccinate against the common ones that normally show up in dogs, even if another one that's uncommon were there, it will definitely limit the intensity of that infection. So you may vaccinate against this one, but it got another one, but because it's the same bacteria and the family, it recognizes some of the same things. It limits the infection and it allows the animal to survive. A lot of people think now that vets will just vaccinate a dog to make a profit, but I guarantee you it definitely costs probably 10 times more to treat a dog sick from either one of these infections than it does to vaccinate an animal. If you're going to have an animal as a pet, one of the things you should look and instantly find its vaccination record. If you got a new puppy, find what they got vaccination they got from the breeders, take the vaccination record, reach out to your veterinarian, let your veterinarian assess it and see what it will need and what follow-ups. I've seen a lot of times when someone got a pup, they had it for a whole year, then it got sick, and they'll be like, "Oh well, that's parvo. Oh, parvo is a puppy disease. Oh well, let me see the vaccination history. They've only been vaccinated at the breeder. They did not do any follow-up, and unfortunately, sometimes they would have lost the animal. So vaccine is the thing. You should always check the vaccination record." And then make sure you keep it up to date. If you're also going to use your animal for a lot of people have the animal as a companion and they do for international travel. Your vaccination would have to be up to date for international travel. That way you avoid moving one disease from one country to the other, or you avoid the animal being exposed to a new disease when it goes to a new location. Me personally, I like doing puppy vaccines at the breeder. So that way I would have seen this animal. It was just introduced to the world, and then it's another joy when they go to their new homes and they call me so I can do more vaccines again. Fast forward to when they're adults, also vaccinate adult dogs. That's a good time. Some dogs are really healthy. They're on good program protocol and programs. The owners are up to date with disease prevention, flea and tick preventative. So I may only get to see them once a year. So a vaccination visit is an opportunity to catch up to see any new lumps and bumps, or just to rebond with this animal. And lots of these animals would love me. Of animals I've seen for the entire 10 years of my career, I've seen them from year one, they're still alive and kicking. And it's definitely a joy to treat healthy animals instead of the fight to save the sick. So, most preventable diseases that you can vaccinate against, I highly recommend that you vaccinate against it. And when the vet tell you come back in 3 weeks, it's not only because they think they're trying to get into your pocket, but the immune system generally takes about 2 weeks to build enough what you call memory antibodies, IgM. So when you give a dose now, it's exposed to this virus or the viral antigen or the killed virus or the modified live virus from the vaccine. It takes just about 2 weeks to build enough antibodies. So if it sees it again and recognize it, it can stem an adequate response. So if you take just about 3 weeks to give the booster dose, you would have already had enough of these antibodies built. So if it sees it again, which it should, it recognizes it and it stems that response, and then it builds even more. So that's the reason why you have a 3 to 4 week interval between doses. But vaccination is a really big topic. It's become controversial over the last 2 years. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, vaccination was no question. If you had a dog, people understood because back then there were millions of dogs dying. And in some places right now, including my country, dogs are dying of parvo every single year. Puppies, entire litters of puppies would die from parvovirus, for instance. You would hear of a rabid animal that was bitten by an Indian mongoose. You can follow our rabies series on the channel and our mongoose trapping. So, for me and a lot of veterinarians, seeing these diseases firsthand is a common thing. So, vaccination is definitely important. We're definitely going to talk some more about dog vaccine and vaccination. Leave a few comments on YouTube what you want to hear about and your opinions on this. If you have any question, leave it as well. It's going to be a part two to the vaccination, but this is all I had for today. So thank you for tuning in to the Dr. Cat of It, the Dog Doctor podcast.